Feynman's Way, English long-form script. Topic: The ancient switch your body has been waiting to flip. Subtitle: Autophagy, the maintenance window and the billion-year secret inside every cell. Estimated runtime: 250 to 55 minutes. There is something strange going on inside your body right now. Not medically strange, not alarming, just genuinely, quietly peculiar, in a way that most people never stop to think about. And here is the thing. The moment I tell you what it is, you will not be able to look at a meal or the space after a meal quite the same way again. Every single second you are alive, your cells are doing one of two things: building something or tearing something down. That is it. There is no third option, no neutral gear, no idle mode. Every cell in your body, all roughly 37 trillion of them, is right now at this very moment running one of those two programs. And which program it is running depends, more than almost anything else, on something you probably did not give much thought to today: whether you ate breakfast. And when. Now, I know what that sounds like. Another fasting video. 16:8, intermittent this, metabolic that we have heard this one. And I want to say right from the start, that is not what this is, not even close. What we are going to do today is something different. We are going to go all the way down, past the surface level advice, past the diet culture framing, all the way to the mechanism, the actual molecular machinery that has been sitting inside every living cell on this planet for more than 1 billion years. Before multicellular life, before the first fish, before anything you might recognize as an animal even existed. Welcome to Feynman's Way, where we take the questions that seem simple on the surface and pull on the thread until the whole sweater comes apart, and then, in what is left, find something far more interesting than the sweater ever was. Today's question sounds almost insultingly straightforward. What happens in your body when you stop eating? You probably think you know the answer. Most people do. And that confident, obvious feeling answer is, it turns out, almost completely wrong. Wrong in a way that inverts the actual picture, the way believing the sun moves around the earth inverts the actual picture. You can build a story on top of it that sounds coherent, but you are missing the real mechanism entirely. And the real mechanism is one of the most extraordinary things in all of biology. So let's start there, with what everyone thinks they know. Here is the picture most people carry. I want to draw it clearly, because I want you to recognize yourself in it, that quiet flash of mild concern when a friend mentions they are skipping lunch, or that low-level alarm in the back of your own mind when you have gone a few hours too long without eating. You stop eating, a few hours pass, your stomach growls, your energy starts to dip. Your body, sensing that fuel is running low, begins to panic. It has no other choice. So it starts breaking down whatever it can reach, and the thing it reaches for first, you have been told, is muscle tissue. You are essentially eating yourself. Not in some abstract metaphorical sense, but literally. Your own carefully maintained muscle quietly being cannibalized to keep you upright. This idea is everywhere. In fitness culture, in nutritional advice handed out at gyms, in the vague anxiety many people feel about skipping a meal. The logic seems almost obvious. No fuel coming in. Body needs fuel. Body takes fuel from the nearest available source. Simple. And I want to be careful here, because this story is not completely invented from nothing. Under extreme prolonged starvation, not a 12-hour fast, but genuine, extended, dangerous starvation, your body does eventually draw on structural tissue. Eventually. After a very long time. After essentially everything else has been depleted. But here is what the story gets completely, fundamentally backwards. Your body's default response to not eating is not panic. It is not emergency mode. It is not the desperate, indiscriminate cannibalization of muscle tissue. It is maintenance. Specifically, it is a maintenance window, a scheduled, systematic, precisely orchestrated biological event that your cells have been trying to run every single time you go long enough between meals, for longer than your species has existed on this planet. A maintenance window that, in the modern world, most people accidentally prevent from ever fully opening, not out of carelessness. Not out of ignorance, simply because of the structure of modern life. Let's find out what actually happens when that window opens. From the very first principles, the Feynman way. Richard Feynman had a habit, almost a compulsion, of finding the hidden assumption buried inside any question he was asked. He used to say that most of what people think they understand is actually just a story they have gotten comfortable with. A story with a hidden premise somewhere in the middle that nobody stops to examine. And the moment you pull that premise out into the light, the story falls apart. What is underneath is almost always stranger. and more interesting, and more beautiful than the story was. The hidden premise in the "your body panics when you don't eat" story is this: that not eating is an emergency. And that premise, when you look at it directly, does not hold up for even a moment. Because for the vast majority of the time your species has existed on this planet, the hundreds of thousands of years before grocery stores, before agriculture, before the concept of 3 scheduled meals a day, not eating for 12 or 16 hours was not an emergency. It was a Tuesday. It was what happened on a day when the hunt did not go well, or you were traveling, or the season was lean. Your body was not designed to treat a missed meal as a catastrophe to be survived. It was designed to treat a missed meal as a scheduled event, something it had prepared for, something it knew exactly what to do with. The question is, what does it do? When you eat something, anything at all, a bowl of rice, a piece of bread, a handful of nuts, your blood sugar rises. In response to that rise, your pancreas releases a hormone called insulin, and insulin carries a message to every cell in your body, a message repeated hundreds of times a day in the average modern person. The message is: build, store, grow, construct. Take in the available resources and put them to work. Think of insulin as a factory foreman. When insulin is high, when the signal is active, every production line in your cellular factory is running at full capacity. New proteins get assembled, energy gets stored as fat and glycogen. Cells divide and multiply. Everything is oriented toward expansion, toward making more. This is not a problem. This is necessary. Without construction mode, you could not recover from exercise, could not grow, could not heal from injury. The building phase is essential. But insulin does something else. Something that almost never gets mentioned in the standard story. When insulin is high, it keeps a specific molecular switch locked in the on position. A switch that functions as the master lever for the entire cellular growth program. Biologists call it mTOR, mechanistic target of rapamycin, which is a spectacular name that tells you nothing useful. So let's call it what it actually is: the construction foreman. When mTOR is active, your cells are in build mode, full capacity, all resources directed toward making new things. And while they are in full build mode, one critically important thing does not happen. They do not clean up. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because it is the key to everything that follows, and I want to give you a picture of what it means in practice. Imagine a factory. A large one, running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year without stopping. Raw materials flow in one end, finished products flow out the other. The factory has a standing policy. Production never stops. Never. Not for a day, not for an hour. Because the orders keep coming in, because there is always more demand, because the management calculates that the cost of any downtime is too high. What happens to that factory over 10 years? Over 20? Over 30? The machinery wears. Slowly, quietly, invisibly at first. A conveyor belt starts running a hair off-center. A motor develops a faint vibration it did not used to have. A seal starts to seep. None of it is catastrophic, none of it is dramatic, but none of it gets fixed either, because fixing it would require stopping the line, and the line never stops. So the problems compound quietly. The worn equipment stays on the floor, still technically running, just running badly, and sometimes, more importantly, actively contaminating the output. Putting defective components into products that would otherwise be good. Your cells, running continuously in construction mode without regular maintenance windows, are that factory. The worn equipment accumulates. The defective components end up in the output. And the factory runs on, not knowing or not caring that it is becoming progressively less efficient and producing progressively lower quality work. The maintenance window is what changes this. And it only opens when the foreman steps back. Here is what actually happens in real time when you stop eating. The timeline matters, and most people have never thought about it in enough detail. For the first several hours after your last meal, roughly 0 to 8 hours, depending on your activity level and what you ate, your body is simply burning through the fuel that is already available, glucose circulating in your blood. And a backup supply stored in your liver as a molecule called glycogen. Your body reaches for this stored fuel the same way you reach for the cash in your wallet before you go to the ATM. It is right there. It is easy. Use what is closest first. This window is quiet, unremarkable. Nothing unusual is happening at the cellular level. Construction mode continues. The foreman keeps shouting, but glycogen is not a deep reserve. It is perhaps half a day's worth of fuel under normal conditions. And somewhere between hour 8 and hour 12 earlier if you were exercising, later if you were sedentary, the stored supply starts to run genuinely low. And here, finally, is where something remarkable happens. Something that runs so contrary to the panic and cannibalized story that it almost feels wrong the first time you hear it. Your body does not panic. It does not hit an alarm. Instead, it reaches, with practiced, efficient calm, for a second fuel system that has been maintained alongside the glucose system your entire life. Waiting for exactly this moment. Fat cells throughout your body begin releasing stored fatty acids into your bloodstream. Your liver takes a portion of those fatty acids and converts them into molecules called ketone bodies. And here is the part that surprises almost everyone. Your brain, an organ that is usually described as running exclusively, inflexibly on glucose, adapts, within a day or two, to run substantially on ketones instead. And it runs well on them, remarkably well. Without the small hourly swings in energy and alertness that come from riding the glucose and insulin cycle. Many people report feeling steadier, not weaker. When this fuel switch is fully underway, this fuel switch is real, it is measurable. Rising ketones in the blood, falling glucose, a literal, trackable shift in which molecules your cells are burning for energy. Biochemists can watch it happen in real time. But here is the dimension of the fuel switch that almost never gets mentioned. It is not just about energy, it is a signal. Glucose metabolism and fat and ketone metabolism run through different chemical machinery. They activate different molecular switches downstream. And one of the switches activated by constant glucose, by chronically high insulin, by the perpetual construction signal, is the same switch that keeps the foreman running at full volume. When the fuel switches, so does the foreman. Somewhere between hour 16 and hour 24 for most people, the exact timing varies considerably by individual. Insulin has fallen far enough, and a second molecular signal called AMP has risen far enough that mTOR gets shut down. Not gradually. More like a switch being flipped. mTOR activity drops. Construction slows. And the moment the foreman steps back, the moment the build signal quiets, a crew that has been standing in the wings walks onto the floor. That crew is called autophagy. Autophagy. From the Greek, auto, meaning self, and phagy, meaning eating. Self-eating. Which, I realize, sounds alarming. It sounds like a system in distress, a desperate organism consuming itself. But that name, like many names in biology, creates exactly the wrong impression. Autophagy is not desperate. It is not indiscriminate. It is precision maintenance. Arguably the most sophisticated quality control system that evolution has ever produced. And it has been running in cells in every complex cellular organism on this planet for over 1 billion years. Inside your cells sit small structures called lysosomes. They are membrane-bound pouches filled with acid and enzymes strong enough to dissolve almost any organic molecule. Under normal, well-fed conditions with mTOR running the show, insulin high, construction mode engaged lysosomes mostly sit quiet. The foreman has no use for a demolition crew when everything is supposed to be new and functional. But when mTOR drops, your cell starts manufacturing something called an autophagosome. You can picture it as a small, flexible, double-walled collection vehicle, a bubble that can form around almost any cellular structure, seal itself, and haul its contents to the nearest lysosome for processing. The autophagosome forms, hunts for its targets, wraps around them, seals itself, and delivers them. And what it hunts for is the critical part. This is where the story diverges completely from the eating your muscle picture. The autophagosome does not grab randomly. It is not a vacuum cleaner running blindly through the cell picking up whatever happens to be closest. It is selective, specifically precisely selective. And what it selects for what gets flagged and collected is what is broken. Damaged mitochondria, your cell's power plants, the ones that have started generating harmful byproducts instead of clean energy. Tagged, collected, dissolved into raw material. Misfolded proteins, the molecular machinery that has bent slightly out of shape, that no longer fits the lock it was designed for, that sometimes clumps with other misfolded proteins into aggregates that actively interfere with normal cellular function. Tagged, collected, dissolved. Old cellular structures that have reached the end of their functional lifespan. Tagged, collected, dissolved. And here is what is essential to understand about what happens next. The dissolved contents, amino acids, fatty acids, the raw molecular building blocks of everything that was just dismantled, re-enter the cell's available pool. They are recycled. The next protein your cell needs to build might be assembled partly from the molecular components of a broken one that just got cleared. Nothing is wasted. This is not destruction. This is a demolition crew that carefully strips and sorts every usable component from a condemned structure before breaking it down. It is precision recycling, running at the scale of trillions of individual sites simultaneously, triggered by the simple act of not sending new material in for long enough. Now, I want to go deeper into one specific part of this process, because I think it is where the mechanism becomes genuinely unsettling in an illuminating way, in a way that changes how you think about aging. Your mitochondria. Inside nearly every cell of your body, you have anywhere from a few hundred to several thousand of these structures, your power plants, the organelles responsible for converting fuel molecules into the form of energy your cell can actually use. And running that conversion process continuously generates byproducts. Specifically, it generates molecules called reactive oxygen species. You can think of these, simply, as molecular sparks electrons that have escaped the system before being fully processed. Under normal conditions, your cells have antioxidant defenses that catch these sparks and neutralize them before they cause damage. The system handles a certain level of spark generation without trouble. It has been doing it since mitochondria and cells first developed their relationship billions of years ago. But a mitochondrion that is old, damaged, or running inefficiently generates more sparks than the defenses can handle, and those sparks do damage. They damage the mitochondrion's own membrane. They damage the DNA inside it. They damage surrounding proteins. They generate a kind of progressive, cascading dysfunction, a broken power plant that produces less energy than it should and actively damages its neighborhood while it is failing. Now multiply that by thousands of mitochondria per cell. And consider that some percentage of those thousands at any given time are past their functional peak, still technically running, just running badly, and in running badly, making things worse for everything around them. Without regular mitophagy, the specific branch of autophagy dedicated to clearing damaged mitochondria, those broken power plants accumulate. They do not retire. They do not get replaced. They simply stay, year after year, in an ever-increasing proportion of your total mitochondrial population, generating sparks and causing damage and degrading the performance of the cells they inhabit. The machinery that addresses this is elegant in a way that I find genuinely beautiful. A protein called PINK. One accumulates specifically on the outer surface of mitochondria that have lost their electrical charge, which is the definitive signature of a mitochondrion that has stopped functioning correctly. A healthy mitochondrion maintains a measurable electrical charge across its membrane. That charge is how it generates energy. When the charge falls, pink one accumulates on the surface like a chemical flag. Like a red sticker that says, "This unit is done." A second protein called Parkin arrives and reinforces that signal. An autophagosome wraps around the flagged mitochondrion, hauls it to the lysosome, dissolves it into its constituent parts. What is left after a round of mitophagy is a leaner, more functional mitochondrial population, fewer broken units, less collateral damage, cleaner energy production. The factory, for a while, runs the way it was supposed to. But this only happens when the foreman steps back. Only when mTOR has dropped. Only when the maintenance window is open. And the maintenance window only opens when you stop eating long enough for insulin to fall. I want to address directly the question that I think is forming in your mind right now. If this maintenance system is so fundamental, if it has been part of cellular biology for 1 billion years, why does the body not simply run it continuously? Why does there have to be a trade-off at all? Why does cleaning require the absence of building? The answer to this question is one of the deepest and most beautiful constraints in all of biology. And it comes down to something very simple. You cannot fully do both at once. Not because of a design flaw, not because evolution failed to find a better solution, but because both processes draw on the same limited pool of resources. The cellular machinery that directs amino acids and energy toward the construction of new proteins is the same machinery that would direct those same amino acids and that same energy toward the demolition and recycling process. You have to choose a mode. You have to prioritize. And here is the evolutionary logic that shaped the trade-off the way it is. When food is abundant, when glucose is high, when insulin is elevated, when resources are flowing in continuously, building is the right priority. Grow, store, expand, reproduce. This is what a successful organism does in a resource-rich environment. When food is scarce, when you are between meals, between hunts, between harvests, building new tissue from scratch is temporarily not the priority. Getting more out of what you have already built is. Running the existing machinery better. Clearing what is broken. Recycling the bad components into functional ones. Becoming leaner and more efficient precisely when the environment demands efficiency. So your biology was built with a direct molecular link between food availability and mode selection. The signal that food is present high insulin, active mTOR directly suppresses the cleaning mode. The signal that food is absent falling insulin, rising AMP, dropping mTOR directly activates it. Build when you can, maintain when you must. The problem in the modern world is that the food is absent signal almost never comes. Not because people are doing something wrong, simply because food is present, continuously. And the eating patterns of modern life: breakfast, a morning coffee with sugar, lunch, an afternoon snack, dinner, something before bed, keep insulin elevated for the vast majority of waking hours. The foreman almost never steps back. The maintenance window almost never fully opens, and the factory runs on. Here is where I want to take you to a dimension of this story that most explanations skip entirely. Because what we have covered so far is the energy story, the fuel switch, the molecular signaling, the autophagy machinery. But there is a second story layered on top of it that may actually matter more in the long run. It is the inflammation story. All of that cellular debris we have been talking about, the broken mitochondria, the misfolded protein aggregates, the damaged membrane fragments, the cellular clutter that accumulates when the cleanup crew never gets called in, does not sit passively inside your cell. It does not wait quietly to be ignored. It does something far less convenient. It provokes your immune system. Your immune system is, at its core, a surveillance operation refined over hundreds of millions of years to detect threats. And one of the patterns it has learned to recognize as a threat signal is damaged cellular material. In nature, a cell full of broken components usually means something bad is happening. An infection, trauma, injury. So your immune surveillance system evolved to treat the chemical signatures of cellular damage as a danger flag, which means that when damaged mitochondria and misfolded protein aggregates and uncleared cellular debris accumulate chronically, not because of infection, not because of injury, but simply because the cleanup crew never gets called in, the immune system responds. Day after day, week after week, year after year, a persistent, low-level hum of immune activation. Inflammatory signals circulating quietly in the background, triggered not by any genuine external threat, but by the unresolved internal clutter of a factory that never closes for maintenance. Your phone keeps buzzing on the table, face down, with a notification that nobody ever reads. The alarm keeps sounding for a threat that is already inside the building. This quiet, persistent background inflammation, not the dramatic, visible inflammation of a fever or an acute injury, but this slow, continuous, low-level immune arousal is now considered by researchers to be one of the central threads connecting the biological process of aging to virtually every major chronic disease associated with it. Heart disease, type 2 diabetes, neurodegeneration, certain cancers. Study after study keeps finding the same signature. A chronic inflammatory background amplifying, accelerating, and in many cases actively enabling the deterioration that we tend to attribute simply to getting older. It may not be aging per se that is doing the damage. It may be the accumulated cellular clutter driving the immune response that the aging body never got the maintenance windows it needed to clear. And here is why autophagy matters so directly in this context. It does not suppress the inflammation. It does not tell the immune system to quiet down or stand down or ignore what it is detecting. It removes what the immune system was detecting. Clear the broken mitochondria, and there are fewer reactive oxygen species leaking into the cellular environment. Fewer reactive oxygen species means less oxidative damage. Less oxidative damage means fewer danger signals reaching the immune surveillance system. Clear the misfolded protein aggregates, and the molecular patterns that trigger the immune alarm are gone. The alarm has no reason to sound, not because it was switched off, because the thing that was triggering it has been cleared. Researchers have found that specific molecules produced during fasting, including certain ketone bodies, can directly quiet particular inflammatory signaling pathways. The exact mechanisms are still being worked out, but the direction of the effect is consistent. Fasting does not add an anti-inflammatory agent to your system. It removes the source of the inflammation. This distinction matters enormously if you want to understand what is actually happening. And now let's talk about your brain specifically, because I think this is where everything we have been building toward becomes personally resonant, and also where the evolutionary logic of the entire system suddenly clicks into focus in a way that is hard to forget. Many people who have done extended fasting 16 hours, 20 hours, sometimes longer, report something that they genuinely did not expect. They expected fog. They expected weakness. The mental equivalent of running on empty. They expected to feel like a computer with low battery, slowing down, conserving power. Instead, many report something that feels closer to the opposite, a quiet, steady mental clarity. Focus that does not feel forced, ideas that surface more easily. A kind of alert calm that is different from the caffeine-driven version most of us rely on. If you have experienced this, you probably wondered what it was. If you have not, you might be skeptical. Let's look at the mechanism. As fasting continues and the maintenance window deepens, as mTOR drops, as the cellular cleanup runs, as ketones rise, your brain increases production of a protein called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. You can think of it, in the most accessible terms, as fertilizer for neurons. It encourages the growth of new synaptic connections between brain cells. It supports the survival of existing neurons under metabolic stress. In multiple animal studies, it has been associated with the generation of new neurons in brain regions tied closely to memory and spatial navigation. Now ask yourself the evolutionary question. Why would natural selection produce a system where the brain invests in itself in growth, in resilience, in new connections precisely when you are not eating? Think about when, in the entire span of human evolutionary history, cognitive performance mattered most. Not when you had just eaten a full meal and were sitting comfortably in a warm shelter. When you were hunting, when the food had run out and you had to find more. When you were tracking an animal across unfamiliar terrain, reading subtle signs in the landscape, navigating back to camp as light was fading, staying alert to danger while running on a caloric deficit. A brain that went foggy and slow under those conditions was a survival liability. An organism whose thinking degraded when food was scarce was going to make worse decisions at exactly the moment good decisions mattered most. That organism's genes were going to be passed on less successfully than the genes of an organism whose brain sharpened under scarcity, whose focus improved, whose recall got better, whose situational awareness heightened precisely when the stakes were highest. The clarity you feel during a fast is not a coincidence. It is not a pleasant side effect. It is an ancient survival adaptation, fully operational, still activating on schedule every single time insulin drops and ketones rise. Whether the reason for the fast is genuine scarcity or a deliberate choice made in a fully stocked modern kitchen, your brain responds to the biochemical signal. The signal is the same signal it has always been. Your ancestors needed their sharpest thinking when food was scarce, so evolution built a system that makes that exactly what happens. Now, I want to take you to a layer of this story that requires everything else we have covered to fully make sense. And I think this is the layer that, once you see it, reorders how you understand everything we have talked about today. Your body replaces itself. Not metaphorically, not philosophically, literally. Almost every tissue in your body is engaged in constant, ongoing cellular turnover. The lining of your gut replaces itself roughly every few days. Red blood cells circulate for about 4 months before being broken down and replaced. Skin cells turn over in a matter of weeks. Even bone, which feels permanent, which we think of as the fixed structural scaffolding underneath everything, is being quietly dissolved and rebuilt in a continuous cycle that takes years to complete. The widely cited estimate, which varies depending on the tissue and the method of measurement but lands in a broadly consistent range, is that the majority of the cells in your body have been replaced at least once within roughly 7 to 10 years. You are not, in any literal physical sense, the same collection of cells you were a decade ago. Most of the atoms that made up your cells then have cycled out, and new ones have taken their place. That is remarkable. And I think most people, when they first encounter this idea, find it somehow reassuring. A fresh start, periodically. The old stuff gradually replaced with new stuff, whatever was worn out, renewed. But here is the question that the comfortable version of this story quietly skips over. New from what? Your cells are not assembling themselves from some pristine, pre-certified, damage-free stock of raw materials that arrives at the construction site in perfect condition. They are building from whatever molecular components are available in the cellular environment at the time. Whatever amino acids and fatty acids and molecular building blocks happen to be present, and if that environment contains oxidative byproducts that were never cleared, misfolded protein fragments that were recycled without being properly processed. Inflammatory signals that have been running in the background for years. Chemical byproducts of broken mitochondria that were never retired. Then the new cell being built right now is being built, at least partly, from compromised stock. Turnover without maintenance is just replacement. It keeps the numbers up. It does not necessarily improve the quality of what gets built. And this is the gap that regular autophagy fills. This is what the maintenance window actually provides at the largest timescale. The 7 to 10 year replacement cycle happens regardless of what you do. Your body is going to replace those cells whether you open the maintenance window or not. That biological process is not in question. What is in question is the quality of the raw material available when the replacement happens. Damaged mitochondria cleared through regular mitophagy do not end up recycled into the next generation of cells. Misfolded proteins systematically broken down by autophagy do not carry their structural errors forward into new tissue. Cells built during and after a maintenance window draw from a cleaner, more carefully audited pool of molecular components. Same turnover rate. Fundamentally different quality of what gets turned over. And across the span of a human lifespan, across multiple iterations of that 7 to 10 year cycle, repeated decade after decade, the compounding difference in raw material quality is not trivial. It is, arguably, one of the most important biological differences between a body that ages well and one that does not. Let me be honest with you here, the way Feynman would insist on being honest. Because this is the part of the conversation where it is tempting to make the leap from the mechanism is extraordinary to here is exactly what you should do about it. And that leap is worth making, carefully. The foundational biology is solid. Autophagy is real, measurable, and well documented. Mitophagy is real. The relationship between fasting duration and the activation of these processes is real and has been demonstrated repeatedly in living systems. The Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 2016 was awarded specifically for work on the mechanisms of autophagy. This is not a fringe idea. It is not speculative. The mechanism exists. What we are still working out, with genuine scientific humility, is the application. Exactly how long a fast needs to be, how frequently these windows need to open, how much individual variation matters, which is very likely a great deal. How the benefits observed in animal models, which are often dramatic and consistent, translate to the more varied landscape of human biology. What happens when fasting intersects with specific health conditions, specific medications, specific life stages? Feynman had a distinction he returned to constantly, the difference between knowing the name of something and actually knowing something. And one of the most common ways scientists and science communicators mislead people, often unintentionally, is by treating a clear mechanism as though it settles questions about application that are genuinely still open. The mechanism here is becoming very clear. The maintenance window exists. It is ancient. It is important. Most people in the modern world open it far less frequently than the biology was built around. The optimal way to open it for any specific individual, given their specific biology and circumstances, that is still actively being worked out. And it probably varies more than any simple protocol can account for. Keep those two things separate. The mechanism is worth understanding deeply. The application requires honest acknowledgement of what we still do not know. Now, let me take you all the way back to the beginning. To the question I said was the right one. Not, what happens when you stop eating? But, what has your body been quietly waiting to do this whole time? We have the answer now. We have followed it all the way down to the molecular level. The fuel switch from glucose to ketones, a shift that is not just about energy, but about which biological programs get activated. The drop in mTOR and the stepping back of the construction foreman. The mobilization of the cleanup crew that has been waiting in the wings. The selective, precise demolition of damaged mitochondria through mitophagy. The systematic quality control of the cellular protein pool. The quieting of the chronic inflammatory background by removing what triggered it. The investment in neurological resilience and cognitive performance exactly when food is scarce. And the improvement in the quality of raw material, feeding your body's ongoing perpetual rebuilding of itself, the cycle that never stops. But that draws from very different stock depending on whether the maintenance window has been open. None of this is a weight loss mechanism. Weight loss may happen as a side effect for some people. In the same way that a factory running regular maintenance might become more efficient without efficiency ever having been the purpose of the maintenance. The maintenance serves the longevity of the factory, the quality of its output over time. Improved efficiency is a consequence of the maintenance working correctly, not the goal. What fasting actually is, at the level we have been exploring today, is a maintenance program. One your biology has been running, was built to run for as long as your species has existed. One that your ancestors triggered involuntarily, regularly, inevitably, every time the hunt came up empty or the harvest was thin or a day passed without enough food. One that every cell in your body is still fully equipped to run, right now, in exactly the same way it always has. A body that never fasts is a body that never closes for maintenance. The foreman never steps back. The cleanup crew never gets dispatched. The broken machinery accumulates on the floor. The inflammatory background hums. The raw material feeding the body's perpetual cycle of replacement gets progressively less clean, cycle after cycle, decade after decade. Whether it is a factory or a kitchen or a biological system refined across 1 billion years of evolution, a system that runs continuously without maintenance does not fail dramatically. It fails gradually, in ways that are almost impossible to point to in the moment, but obvious in retrospect. In ways that accumulate silently until they are simply the dominant story of how the system works. Your cells have been ready for the maintenance window their entire lives. They know exactly what to do when it opens. The machinery is in place. The cleanup crew is standing by. Every time insulin falls far enough, every time the fuel switch flips, every time mTOR steps back, the door opens, and 1 billion years of accumulated biological wisdom walks through it. I want to leave you with something to actually think about. Not a protocol, not a list of rules. Something more fundamental than that. We spend an enormous amount of collective mental energy as individuals, as a culture, thinking about input. What to eat, what to supplement, what to add to the system. The entire structure of popular nutritional thinking for the past century has been organized almost entirely around the question of what to put in. What if the other side of that equation matters equally? What if the systems for removing what no longer works, for clearing the cellular debris, retiring the damaged machinery, recycling the compromised parts into clean raw material for the next round of construction, are as important to the long-term functioning of the system as anything you could possibly add? What if the body's most remarkable capability is not its capacity for growth, but its capacity for renewal? Because here is what is interesting about renewal in contrast to growth. Renewal does not require addition, it requires subtraction. It requires the absence of the building signal for long enough to let the clearing happen. It requires giving the cleanup crew an open floor to work on. Your body already knows how to do this. It has known for over 1 billion years. The instructions are not somewhere you need to find. They are not something you need to acquire or synthesize or supplement. They are written in molecular detail in every cell you have, waiting for the signal that it is time to run. The signal is not complicated. It is not expensive. It does not require a prescription or a device or a specialist. It is simply the absence, for long enough, of the thing that keeps the foreman shouting, the space between. That is the ancient switch. That is what we have spent today exploring. A maintenance mode older than complex life, still fully operational in every cell of your body, requiring only the right conditions to activate. Your cells have been ready for this their entire lives. The cleanup crew has been standing by, tools in hand, since the day you were born. Every time you give them the open floor they need, every time insulin falls and mTOR steps back and the maintenance window opens, 1 billion years of evolutionary refinement goes to work. The factory closes for maintenance. The broken machinery gets cleared. The raw material of the next cycle of renewal gets cleaner, and the system, for a while, runs the way it was designed to run. That is the story. That is what is happening inside you, right now. Or waiting to happen, waiting for the signal that the building phase can pause and the maintenance can begin. Thank you for spending this time on Feynman's Way. If something we covered today made the world look even slightly different than it did an hour ago, if you will look at a meal, or the space after a meal, with a different kind of attention, then we did exactly what we came here to do. There is so much more to pull on from here. The sirtuins, a family of proteins that function as cellular stress response managers and that connect directly to the fasting signal through pathways we barely touched today. The role of something called NAD+ in the aging biology story and how it links back to the mitochondrial picture we spent time in. The specific research on protein aggregates and neurodegeneration and what autophagy does and does not do in that context. Each of those threads leads somewhere genuinely worth following. But those are for other days. For now, there is something waiting inside you. Something ancient. Something extraordinarily capable. Something that has been part of life on this planet since before animals existed. The cleanup crew is standing by. The door opens with the simplest signal there is. See you next time on Feynman's Way. End of script.